Hello, good crowd. We're excited. Today we have Nancy Mahon back with us. This is her fourth time on the show over the last 6 years. Nancy is the Global Executive Director of MAC Viva Glam Fund and the Senior Vice President of Global Corporate Citizenship and Sustainability for the Estée Lauder companies. One of my favorite people. Stick around. You don't want to miss this episode.
Welcome to the Your Mark on the World show with your champion of social good, Devin D. Thorpe.
Nancy, welcome back.
Glad to be here. I can't believe it's been 6 years.
Yeah, it is. It's remarkable that you and I have been now talking. You were one of the early guests on the show, one of the first 50 or so guests on the show. We've now had over 1,100 guests. And we're thrilled to have you back. So thank you very, very much.
I think you're one of the great pioneers of purpose. So this is, and now we're in this time where it's super important and super relevant. So it's great to keep talking about it.
Yeah. Well, and you were, speaking of pioneers, you and the MAC Viva Glam Fund were really some of the early pioneers in this. And you've recently rebranded. Let's talk a little bit about that. MAC Viva Glam Fund was previously the MAC AIDS Fund. Tell us a little bit about what went into the rebranding there.
Sure. Well, first of all, I was lucky enough to become the head of the MAC AIDS Fund 14 years ago when the brand was growing in leaps and bounds. And essentially, the MAC AIDS Fund was founded because MAC Cosmetics was really founded out of the LGBTQ community. And our two founders were two guys who were, if they could have gotten married, they would have been married, and Frank. And essentially their feeling was, our friends are dying and this is part of who we are. So we want to create this model. And what was so brilliant was it predated cause marketing. And it actually wasn't cause marketing, it was just cause. And the model really was, let's take the sexy, wonderful playfulness of cosmetics and let's sell something to raise money. So the reason it's been so successful over the years is because it was embedded in the business model and that the whole campaign was kind of embedded in the brand. So, and since then, cause-related marketing has happened. We've raised over $500 million through the sale of Viva Glam lipstick, literally like $18 at a time. So it's really been a kind of populist movement of our makeup artists who recommend the product. Our spokespeople, who now in the marketing world are called influencers, but they just cared in the past, and also our consumers. And so I think what we spend a lot of time thinking about is how to understand what we're good at and how to hold on to that, and at the same time how to evolve where we need to change. So what's terrific is since we started, we've had incredible, like the number of people dying of HIV has been cut in half. The number of people on treatment is, I think the last number I saw was like 19 million people. What has been sad though, despite those great strides, is that even though we now have the medication to basically have people live, essentially it's a kind of lower form of chemotherapy for the rest of your life, but it will allow you to live a longer life and, basically die usually of other causes, although often related to the immunosuppression of many, many years. But at the end of the day, and it will prevent you from transmitting the virus. But what we now have is really a question of who has access to the medication and the testing. And the distance has grown bigger and bigger. So just by way of example, in the United States, the overall number of new infections is going down. That is not true of gay and bisexual men of color. Number continues to go up, Black men and Latino men. So we are now in a place, and also if you look internationally, sub-Saharan Africa, outside the US and developed countries, it's really sub-Saharan Africa and women and girls. And if you look at their infection rates, they're much higher than men and boys. So our thinking was, well, we've always funded causes that are related to stigma and equality, and we've always funded women and girls, but it is really clear that unless we redouble our efforts and use our corporate microphone to specifically focus on those issues, that we won't make any headway. So then the question becomes, okay, well, and the other thing is we changed the name because we believe we wanted to create we wanted to create a bigger nexus and a tighter nexus between the product and the money we raised. Because the bottom line is if people don't buy that product, we don't have any money to give away. Also, people found our name kind of confusing. So when we made all those changes, we also said, we're going to focus specifically on LGBTQ equality, continue with AIDS and HIV, and be true to particularly food and housing. And then lastly, we're going to really focus on equality of women and girls. So last week, actually, we took a stance, a very public stance, around reproductive health and choice. There was a sign-on letter that was put together through one of our big grantees, Planned Parenthood, NARAL, and ACLU. And as an employer, we stood up with Everlane and Warby Parker and Refinery 29, and we said we support the right of women and girls to have access to reproductive health care. So, so in some ways, given our ethos, that wasn't very radical, although by the external world, it was considered very radical. And so for us on the fund, it gave us the opportunity to kind of lean in with our microphone and show up. Because one of the things that we see again and again in the sort of business purpose space is people care what you do much more than where you give or what you say. So that's an incredible, nice opportunity for us to kind of move the needle in other areas. And it's pretty clear that standing in place is no longer an option. And unfortunately, healthcare has become a lot about your race, your class, your country of origin, and your gender. And unless we squarely take those on, we're not ending AIDS anytime soon. In fact, there was a very interesting editorial last week, and the title of it in the New York Times was, "If we do this right, we could end AIDS." But the do this right was such a long list, what we had to do, and one of which was gender equality and stigma. So we're just kind of opening our arms a little more broadly and explicitly.
Huge, but important shift. So one among those things is that you are sponsoring some Pride events here in June. We're recording this in June. This may air in July. But you are sponsoring some Pride events. Tell us a little bit about what you're sponsoring and how that fits into the strategy.
Sure. Well, this is the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall bar. Either it was kind of a riot slash, Larry Kramer has actually said it was just a fight in a bar. But we feel like it's a significant inflection point in the LGBT history, right? So what's happened is the Pride Parade, which we've been part of for years and years and years, sometimes with a float, sometimes without, has become a much bigger deal. So we felt it was important corporately to show up and have a float. And for us, many of us, to show up and be on the float and walk and really use our corporate microphone. There also, as you may know, is a counter-Pride movement because like most great progressive communities, there's a voice and there's a counter voice. And so we actually, through another grant, are supporting the counter Pride. The MAC AIDS Fund, the MAC Viva Glam Fund has also supported the counter movement. We feel it's super important to have all voices heard. And one of our board members is super involved in that movement as well. And that is a little, I would say, more grassroots and doesn't really have corporate sponsors. But we felt that it was important that the various views in the LGBTQ community were heard. You know, and Pride, I have to say, as a gay woman in her 50s, has become kind of crazy. You know, it used to be literally that I would get beaten up all the time for holding my partner's hand. And now Target has a Pride section. It's all over the place. So, you know, our hope, and look, that's what we were about. That's why we started all of this. I'm really looking forward, and I think Mac is looking forward, is, okay, well, what is equality 3.0 look like? And how do we use these sort of kind of marketing moments around inclusion and diversity to really have a deeper conversation about, you know, Steve Jobs said, think different. Interestingly, he never said think differently. But I think a lot of what people who are different bring to the party is that we think differently. And so that's a lot of the reason Mac has been so successful as a business. So as a business, we're interested in what is that next conversation like.
As you look back, on all you've accomplished over your 14 years there, as you look back on the work of Viva Glam, even before you were there, what are you most proud of having accomplished?
Well, first of all, I'm very proud of the people that I've been able to work with. I think what we're seeing now is that, it really is the golden age of purpose. And with social media, people really, and with smaller brands, I think there's a real focus on trust, confidence, and being transparent. And so I think what I'm, proud of being part of is that MAC has been one of the brands that's been very transparent since the very beginning. And I think, one of the things that is lovely about Facebook or Instagram is you can see how important this cause has been to so many people. And I think that's what I'm most proud of. And all of those people, people change, they might go on to different companies. And I'm proud of the people who have gone on to do work in other companies and stay true to that. We actually just had around the California fires, there was a prom. And actually at Estée Lauder, the Clinique brand and the MAC brand worked together, and our division found some product to donate, and they did the prom for I think it's called Paradise, California. Is that the name of that town?
Yeah.
So that's the kind of stuff that it's less about like what I've done than what has the spirit and the mobilization of people done. And how does that live on? And I've been really impressed more recently with the whole notion of, somebody recently talked about boycotting or boycotting. I think we do see a lot of consumer activism now of what people will buy or not buy. And I think the beauty industry has been a part of that. And it's been an interesting dialogue.
We've talked a little bit about authenticity in the past, but you talk about the origins of the MAC AIDS Fund being tied directly to this authentic desire preceding cause marketing to actually be all cause, not cause marketing. How do you perpetuate that authenticity today?
Well, it's interesting. I went to London for work, and I came back on the plane, and I watched a documentary on Aretha Franklin, who I've always loved, and she has that line about to be real. So, the natural woman, what makes you a natural woman? I think why MAC has always had this right is we're very transparent about who we are. So I think the sort of secret or core of business corporate purpose is you have to be clear that you're a business. And I've been lucky enough to work, I worked with George Soros at his foundation. I was lucky enough to run a big NGO here in New York, God's Love We Deliver. And I think that there's a particular viewpoint we have as business people. And at the end of the day, if the business doesn't stay open and healthy, we don't have any jobs, we don't have any money to give away. And that's where the Viva Glam model, I think, has always been very helpful. And that I think the donors are most effective when they're really clear that it's not their money, that it's this incredible privilege to give money away, and you have to kind of stay humble and stay connected. And for businesses, we have a particular viewpoint and sort of rigor of thinking. We think about markets. How do we sell our stuff, right? And in a lot of ways, that's where NGOs maybe and the healthcare industry and the government has been a little disconnected from their actual market. And so one of the things I think that I'm hoping is Purpose 3.0 is that we have a very specific business lens at the table in problem solving. Because one of the things, having run an NGO, that's very complicated about them, or being a funder, is your feedback loop is very indirect. If you're selling stuff and people don't like it or it breaks or whatever, they bring it back and you go out of business. Whereas if you're giving stuff away, the feedback loop is very attenuated because people want to keep getting free stuff, basically. But it makes for very sloppy business models a lot. And your KPIs, I think, are kind of attenuated. So I think I know what we're thinking a lot about here is, how do we bring our core business knowledge to this cause? So one thing actually we're doing at Estée Lauder is people are rotating into our department from other departments to help us do citizenship and sustainability work. And it's really helpful because we might have assumed something that someone who comes in from a marketing department or an HR would have a completely different perspective on it. So, and then lastly, I think what's very exciting is, I mean, it's being called ESG, environmental, social, and governance, but it's becoming a core aspect of business. And so people don't care if you give away a ton of money if you don't treat people in your factories very well. So there is a way now where it's been legitimated. And that's really the fun, interesting part now is how do we integrate and how do we make it, how do we be real business people instead of the nice people who give the money away?
Interesting.
Hopefully we're nice.
Yeah. You were appointed by Barack Obama to serve on I think it's called the President's Council on HIV and AIDS.
Total mouthful. We used to call it PACHA.
Do you continue to serve on that council today?
No, I was lucky enough I was appointed to be the chairperson actually without having been on it. And this is a testament to persistence because I actually tried to get on it originally and they said no. So, you sort of, you move on and, the opportunity that I was given, which I really appreciated, was it was the same time that the Affordable Health Care Act was being developed. And it was a great window into how hard people in government work. It was also a great window of how to take practitioners, doctors, service providers, and I really have to thank I reported directly, however it was structured, to then Secretary of Health and Human Services Kathleen Sebelius, who very personally showed up and listened, and her various leads, whether they be Medicaid, Medicare. Health law. I'm a lawyer by training, and I took health law. I thought I was going to be a health lawyer, but that was the last course I ever took, and I'm definitely not a health lawyer. It's very complicated, and it's a lot about who pays for healthcare, basically, and how do we make sure people living with HIV are included. So that was really a privilege to be part of the process, and similar to my day job, it was most a privilege to work with the people who are working so hard to make it happen. And those councils are actually great opportunities for the government to leverage people who have day jobs and to really contribute. So I think I was always so impressed how hard people worked, how passionate people were, and it was a great experience. But my term actually ended on the last day of President Obama's term, so. So I was no longer part of the council.
How has the change in administration changed the way you think about your work with MAC Viva Glam?
Well, one of the early sorrows, I think, of our movement was that there was not a lot of funding in prevention in the United States. We have a lot of hang-ups about talking about sex, basically. And so as a result, we had a lot more AIDS cases than we should have had. So I think I'm hoping, that the fact that pride has become such a bigger cause for so many companies that sort of unwillingness to talk about sex, I think, has gone away. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have a 14-year-old and a 17-year-old, so I totally understand. In some ways, like please, I don't want to talk about sex. But you also understand that the stakes are very high. And if you look at other countries like Switzerland, or they're very, very rational in Switzerland, but even, Canada or the UK, where there's socialized medicine, there's a much greater ability to focus on the humanity of people and sexual behavior and what it puts people at risk for. So, and I think the other is that for whatever reason, it seems, and it may be just because I live it in our country, is we spend a lot of time sort of trading major parties. And when the party is traded, a lot of the legislative gains are then completely undone. And so as a result, we do a lot of 5-step forward and then 5 steps backward. And so for me around healthcare, I actually have 2 siblings that are on what's called Obamacare. And if it wasn't for Obamacare or affordable healthcare, we better correct, they wouldn't have healthcare. So, and they have actually are part of two different political parties. And so I think what my hope is that if the business takes on healthcare and prevention in a bigger way, it becomes apolitical, just like we spoke about reproductive health and choice. That's a healthcare right, and it's about access to care. And giving any one individual access to care is not in any way seen as disrespectful of another person's life or identity. And that's where in this country we seem to lose a lot of ground back and forth and forth and back around reproductive health and choice, around things like gay marriage or kids. Like I have a 17-year-old and a 14-year-old, and we had to go through all these unbelievable adoption things to 5 lawyers later for my partner to basically have them have her last name. And so it makes everyday life inequality kind of hard when we socially, I think, are recognizing that, and even in the business community, but that there's all these really old laws that we keep hashing and rehashing in a way that's pretty remarkable for the rest of the world. And I think, as a proud American, all my grandparents are from Ireland, I think it really puts us behind. We keep rehashing the same stuff. And it puts us as a country, it's kind of hard to be a superpower when you're still going over the same stuff you did 35 years ago.
Yeah, interesting. Well, Nancy, what's your superpower?
I don't really have any superpowers. I think my superpower is humility and my sense of humor. I think that part of me feels like I'm too young to be 55. Although as I see my kids live through high school, I've said no one really would ever want to relive high school. So there are some privileges of age. But I think that for me, what's exciting about the field is there's so much more to learn. I'm really excited about integrating social impact and environmental impact. Really excited to, there was an age of what we called AIDS exceptionalism, which was basically like AIDS is different. We're very different. And I think, particularly for when I ran God's Love We Deliver and we expanded the mission to breast cancer, basically all illnesses. I thought, wow, we have a lot to learn from these breast cancer women. They are really crushing it in certain areas. And, why would one disease be better or different from another? So I think we're moving into more a common ground. So I think what makes me excited is that we have the privilege of being in a place to maybe make a difference. And that difference, if we can kind of keep our biases and our turfism and all sorts of things, sometimes that happens in the NGO community too, aside, we can make a much bigger difference. So on the Planned Parenthood effort, for instance, in the big grant that we did, we partnered with Benefit, another cosmetic company. That's what we're all about. We should be doing that. Whereas on the choice, we partnered with a whole bunch of companies like Warby Parker that we had never partnered with before. So I think that, if we stay open to it, there's a lot of possibilities. And also, I think consumers have a lot of superpowers, and it's very exciting to watch them exercise it.
Interesting take.
Well, and also friends. You and I have been at this now for 6 years. And I think, surround yourself with people you trust and you admire and listen. So keep at it, Devin. You were definitely a pioneer. I'm glad you're really being super recognized, but you were kind of a podcast guy before podcasts were cool.
Well, thank you very much, Nancy. I appreciate it. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. And I know we've gone over and you're very, very, very busy.
But I do have to call my father, so I can't be late for that.
Okay. So take 1 minute. Tell us how people can learn more about MAC Viva Glam Fund.
Oh, sure. Well, you can certainly go to maccosmetics.com. You can Google MAC Viva Glam Fund, and you can go into any MAC store and ask the makeup artists. And if you don't buy makeup or don't want to buy makeup that day, just give them a hug and say you think it's really great. Okay.
Nancy, again, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. We wish you every success.
Great work.
Great work. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye.
Let's do some good.
Okay.
Devin Thorpe's mission is to end extreme poverty, improve global health, and mitigate climate change before 2045 by finding and sharing the stories of those who are doing the most good.
Thanks for tuning in to the Your Mark on the World show, the Social Impact Podcast. Please subscribe via YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or Spotify.